Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of December 27th, 2020. This will be our last Virtual Enlightenment Salon for the very turbulent year of 2020, and what better occasion than this to have an in-depth philosophical and practical conversation about transhumanism, about culture, about self-improvement, about a variety of other subjects. My name is Gennady Stoliarov II. I'm the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party, and we have a great panel for you today. We have our director of visual arts, Art Ramon Garcia. We have our director of foreign relations, B.J. Murphy. We have our director of applied innovation, David Shoemaker. We have Pavel Ilin, our secretary. We have Arin Vahanian, who is our vice chairman. We have our member, Brent Elman. We have Alexandria Black, our director of community resilience, who hopefully will be able to join us soon. And our special guest is Francesco Neo Amati. He is a transhumanist philosopher. He has been involved in the transhumanist movement for most of the past decade, and he is the founder and administrator of Transhumanism, the Future of Humanity, which is one of the largest Facebook groups dedicated to transhumanism in the world. And it has been a tremendously active Facebook group. I post there, many of our other members post there, but we will let Francesco introduce himself to a greater extent. In particular, it would be good to hear from you, Francesco, how you originally became interested in transhumanism, what brought you to it, and a bit about the history of transhumanism, the future of humanity, how it developed, how it grew, how you were able to attract so much attention for it.
First and foremost, thank you for having me today. It's an absolute honor. I know what you've done, with transhumanism within the community. So to be part of this is an honor. As far as transhumanism itself, I became interested in the movement around 2010. But it's been a lifelong pursuit without knowing that I was getting involved in transhumanism, dating back to when I was about 13 years old, within gaming. Getting involved with technology and seeing how much influence, technology can have on your perspectives, your entertainment and all that. And then that kind of, I'm sorry, I just got cut off a little bit. Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, and then that just kind of evolved when I watched The Matrix back in 1999. And that was also sort of like a stepping stone to transhumanism for me. I was fascinated by the idea of optimizing ourselves, through technology, but also with that movie, portrayed through meditation and ways of doing it without technology at all, just on a basic human level. And then from that point on, there was and I'm sorry to hear in the background, it's my dog with a little squeaky toy. But actually, it wasn't until 2010 when I was exposed to Deus Ex, believe it or not, Human Revolution. The original Deus Ex also had an influence, but it didn't delve into transhumanism as much as Deus Ex Human Revolution, which really segued into me creating the Transhumanism group. I also have the largest Deus Ex fan community in the world, recognized by Eidos Montreal and Square Enix. I have several developers in that community. I actually received the collector's edition for free, the first studio edition of Mankind Divided. I had the first game completely signed by the team. Just very passionate about transhumanism. And I've also written articles for Grace Scott. He's a futurist, also technical philosopher. Was also run with B.J. Murphy. It's the Serious Wonder, and I have a few articles there too. And it just grew from there. I started the community in 2014, and the aspiration was to unite people around the world to discuss, the future. Finding ways to segue from here to there, and finding like minds, to help contribute to this movement, and really trying to find the core principles, the core philosophy of what it is that transhumanism is after, what it's aspiring to. And for me personally, I've always found that it starts with the basic human aspiration, sort of like Star Trek, to just become the best version of yourselves, and then expand that to a civilization, if on and beyond Earth. And so, to me, it's been I guess, for the better part of a decade, like you mentioned, it's been it's been a ride, to try to first of all elaborate on what transhumanism is, but to dispel what it isn't.
Yes, indeed. And in many ways, your journey, Francesco, is similar to that of a lot of other people who came to transhumanism, in that first you were an implicit transhumanist before you even knew what transhumanism was. And then as you came into contact with the philosophy, you embraced it more explicitly. But what's interesting also is that a cultural product of the broader culture, a computer game, Deus Ex Human Revolution, solidified your commitment to transhumanism. And I've played the game as well after I became an explicit transhumanist, and I was quite intrigued to see all of these transhumanist themes in it. Arin, you have a very similar origin story in the transhumanist movement, and that the game also brought you to transhumanism. So if you could talk about it, and perhaps share with Francesco your impressions of what the game did for you, and perhaps the two of you could have a bit of a discussion about what makes that game such a powerful draw for people.
Indeed, and hearing Francesco talk, it just kind of like watching myself talk. I think my journey was quite similar, in that I was into transhumanism even before I knew what it was. But I think it was Deus Ex Human Revolution that really got me into the scene. Actually, what's interesting is that directly within the game, there are books and things that you pick up along the way that specifically reference transhumanism. So it's just such a beautiful tribute to transhumanism and the promise that it holds for humanity. But I would say that video game got me directly into transhumanism, because I like Francesco, I had always the sort of the things I believed in mesh really well with transhumanism. I just didn't know of the term until of course playing the game, and of course playing the game, I would say it changed my life. Not the other Deus Ex games, but Human Revolution in particular, I would say it changed my life for the better. I wouldn't be sitting here today if it wasn't for that game. And so it was just really huge in terms of my personal development. But yes, what really struck me about that game is not just the incredible art in the game, which was so unique, but it just of course a lot of the themes. It's really difficult to come across a game that was that unabashedly transhumanist, right? And it makes sense, because I believe Jonathan Jacques Pelletet and a few of the other people who worked on the game are transhumanists.
Yep. And what was beautiful about that too, it was that they coined it as the cyber renaissance. So it had the gold, right, and it had that whole theme, right, that permeated throughout the whole experience. Like a new age, right, of technology, but also it wasn't biased, right? It showed the implications, the repercussions of taking advantage, corporations, and using it for the wrong reasons, and then it showed the potential, right, of where it can go if you use it for the right reasons. And actually choosing one of those endings at the end, Adam Jensen, Elias, he pretty much summed it up with what could happen if we do the right thing with it, like David Sarif would say. And so that game did change my life also. And I look back at my life and I'm like, wow, it started with Metal Gear Solid when I was 13, then The Matrix, then Deus Ex. So it was like a bunch of stepping stones to where I am today. And another big factor in my life, the big one for me, was Bruce Lee. Self-actualization, also Maslow. These were all, I guess they're all beneath the umbrella of transhumanism. And actually Maslow, he passed away, but the self-transcendence, he never completed it. And I felt very inclined to take his philosophy, Bruce Lee's philosophy of self-actualization, Buddhism and all that, which is also very prevalent in transhumanism also in these artistic representations, whether it's the Matrix and Deus Ex and even Cyberpunk 2077, where there's a future where, you find yourself and you know who you are, and then you take that and you try to optimize it, right? It's like anything else in life. I feel that if you don't know, if you don't love yourself, how can you love anything else, kind of thing, like that whole saying, right? So I feel that, and we'll get into it a little bit later, but I feel that transhumanism itself needs to be grounded in what is the core aspiration before you apply technology. What the external factors, what is it as a basic human level are you looking for, right? And how can that benefit humanity and a whole? And that's where inspirations from Star Trek come, and for the greater good. And there's technologies today that are also present in Deus Ex and whatnot that show you that it's possible to communicate the benefits of transhumanism and bettering mankind, humankind for future generation beyond our time. And I think that it starts now defining what it is and really alleviating misconceptions.
Yes, indeed. So who else has played Deus Ex Human Revolution here, apart from the three of us? Well, I will say,
myself.
Go ahead, BJ. So what are your impressions of the game before I share my own?
It's pretty much the same as everybody else has listed. The very open catering to transhumanist topics, from cyber organisms and the ability to not just modify the human body, but also our surrounding environments, and that relationship, that symbiotic relationship that is established between humans and their environment. More that it's a lot more explicit than the relationship that we currently have today, as we try to become more one with our environment and rectify it, or try to address the issues and problems that we've caused on our own planet. It showed a more direct relationship, the one that when we affect the earth, it affects us. And I found that that symbiosis quite beautiful within the Deus Ex game. And those were my impressions largely when it came to my playthrough.
Mm-hmm. Well, as a transhumanist, I couldn't help but cheer for Seraph Industries and take the side of David Seraph when I played through the game. And this did affect the ending that I picked. And I understand in some ways the creators meant for David Seraph to be at least a partly ambivalent character, in the sense that he didn't always foresee the consequences of his actions, but nonetheless, his intentions were clearly good. And on net, if you pick the ending that favored him, it would be a better world. Indeed, in the subsequent Deus Ex games, the character is not presumed to have selected that ending, but David Seraph still shows up in a few cameo appearances, and he's more like this former prominent entrepreneur, now kind of receded into the background, but he still maintains these noble intentions and the desire to improve humanity. So a kind of transhuman idealist who has to deal with a much more dystopian world than the one he hoped to create. And I think a lot of transhumanists today are in a position to feel quite sympathetic to that character.
Absolutely. I think this is Francesco now. I actually absolutely agree with you. He has the idealist view, and I think that we run into that problem also as philosophers. We tend to think in ideal terms, and we don't always consider the external factors that play into these ideal visions of the future, whether it's, poverty, or, the way that families were raised, cultures. There's so many factors outside of our bubble that play into, it's halting that future, or having a wrench in that future, because you need to get past a few hurdles first, and sometimes turmoil to get to where you want to be. And I think in David Seraf's case, I think that's what it represents, is someone who had these pure intentions of really, truly caring for humanity, but you had external factors, misrepresenting him and doing things to throw him off track. But he has a famous line, if you remember. He says, "They cannot stop us. They cannot stop the future." And that's the most important thing, is if you have good intentions, and you're looking out an altruistic view of, what you want for humanity. I think that we're heading in the right direction, or at least we can, have a ripple effect, and hopefully, it extends out to the world.
Mhm. Yes, indeed. And there is a hope in me that the good intentions will ultimately prevail, that even though humankind is experiencing quite a difficult time, ultimately the principles of transhumanism are versatile enough and relevant enough to this current predicament that they will offer us a way out.
I think we also live in a time now where we have to look at the resources that we have to communicate, uh, the facts about what transhumanism is and what we aspire as a civilization, that weren't available decades ago, right? The internet, and using it for good, right? Like the meme generation, how much of an influence that has on, it's almost like the monkey effect, right? The 99 monkey effect. Like one group of people feels a certain way, and then it kind of gets out into the world, and then everyone starts to see things that they didn't realize were there, but they are there, because it's creating almost like an atmospheric effect. And I feel that we can utilize this platform, the internet and whatnot, to do that.
Mhm. Yes, indeed. Now, I'm
Speaking
curious
of
of,
hope,
yes.
I really like the Deus Ex Mankind Divided. It's not as optimistic as Human Revolution, but it's tackle a very important problem of othering. And as you know, the augmented humans become other and Mankind Divided, and they suffer all sort of discrimination and othering. And I think it's important to create this concept of we, in which we include not only all humans but also augmented humans, potential others which going to appear, which going to arise through this augmentation and upgrade process, and as well as sentient AIs or sentient robots, whatever sentient beings, whatever form they're gonna take, so they should be included to the uh, we. Yeah, but it's less hopeful and
No, I
yeah.
wholeheartedly agree with that. I mean, that's why one of the main reasons I even started these groups, as far as presented in my philosophy class in 2010, is because I wanted people who weren't exposed to it, who weren't familiar with transhumanism, to understand that even if you upgrade yourself and you see your body as a machine, there's an essence within that you don't lose, right? If you don't speak, you can't hear, you can't see, there is still a human. There's a part of you that still is existing beyond the physical, and I feel that if we can nail that, and you can look at people who are augmented, and don't discriminate, because that within that body, there's just a vessel. It's a vessel for the human to experience itself. And I used examples back in the day with the television, the telegraph to the smart TV. The essence of that is still the same. It's just translated better, communicates better what it is. And so the body and the human is very similar to that, in the sense that over time we've found technologies in medicine and whatnot to improve our mental health, our physical health, being able to walk in when they thought you never could, and yet nothing's changed within. Right, you are able to experience yourself more optimally. And you can apply that philosophy to inanimate things that improve over time, but don't lose the essence of what they're supposed to do, like the phone or the television or radio, and the same with the human.
Yes, indeed. And I'm curious with regard to your thoughts on this, Francesco. How can one more effectively trigger this kind of positive feedback loop where transhumanism influences culture, which in turn leads to additional recognition of transhumanism? Because this happened with the Deus Ex games. As you mentioned, the creators are transhumanists. They're definitely aware of the philosophy, but they brought this game to a broader public in a way that appealed to people who didn't explicitly identify as transhumanist at the time, yet some of the players of those games became transhumanists as a result.
Right. So I think, going back to what I was saying earlier about using this platform, using the internet age as a way to communicate, the ideas of transhumanism and its benefits, but also to display its possible repercussions. I think what's important is that you utilize the most popular social media outlets, and we've seen that in the Queens Gambit, I think it is, the new chess TV show. How after people started to watch that Netflix show, people were all of a sudden in swarms interested in chess, right? So if you can utilize these platforms to show miniseries or documentaries on transhumanism and its potential, right? And make it more mainstream, and also in a language that can be understood. I think we get caught up in this field, in this movement where there's a lot of intellectuals who, again, forget that there's those who don't even understand what transhumanism is, and that we have to find a way to communicate it on a basic level while retaining its core, philosophy. And so a lot of that comes down to utilizing the language to the best of your ability, but also metaphors. I mean, this is what artists and musicians do when they can't explain or express or encapsulate the truth or what they want to say, like the image in their head. They use metaphors and imagery and sound and music as a universal language to paint the picture, to more accurately express what it is that they're trying to say. And sometimes words aren't enough, right? So in one way we can break that barrier is to utilize these methods in art, and that's a way to establish a culture around transhumanism. And then you apply that to school system. We have gender studies, right? Well, how come we can't implement more philosophy into school? I think that's one area I want to delve into a little bit later, about how I think it's important that philosophy will not go anywhere, in my opinion. I think philosophy is only going to become more prevalent as the future goes in the direction of transhumanism and biotechnology, because we have to establish these values, these perspectives, that these critical thinking, logical reasoning, empathetic intelligence. These are all core values of benefits you get from philosophy that you can implement in an early age in education. So from the education system to social media to technologies like virtual reality, which is readily available to a lot of people these days, whether it's on your phone or in gaming or whatever. Virtual reality is a great tool that even psychologists have used to allow people to experience something that is difficult for them to experience on their own, whether it's a guided meditation, or if you want to show them a virtual tour of something like the Venus Project, right? Jacques Fresco's the belated Jacques Fresco, and show what that future could look like. I think you need to bring the future closer to home.
Yes, and it's interesting that you're referencing technologies like virtual reality, which are essentially emergent technologies of the transhuman era, with the potential to be used to further advance the ideas of transhumanism. It's like these technologies offer a foothold, or a foot in the metaphorical door, so to speak, that then other content creators can use to communicate the message in creative ways that reach larger audiences.
Absolutely.
Yes, very good. So I would like more insights from the panel on the subject of how to trigger this positive feedback loop between culture and transhumanism, because I think that's key to our objectives within the US Transhumanist Party in terms of growing the movement, getting more recognition, essentially breaching this awareness gap that still exists among large segments of the public. David, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. As we've been talking, and I want to comment on that subject, as we've been talking, I've been thinking about science fiction games and this transhumanist game, which I haven't played, but the idea excites me. I like science fiction, whether it be in books or movies or in a game format, but I tend to find that it's rather narrow. It's single dimensional, if you will. They'll introduce a concept like faster than light travel, but the humans are still the same. We still have the same human problems. We still have pretty much everything else stays the same, with one or maybe two or three technologies projected into the future. And as I'm looking at transhumanism as I see it, we talk about impacting health, long life, economics, transportation, governance, how people get together and work. It's very, very multidisciplined, multidimensional. So I tend to think, as I'm listening to this conversation, that that's what we need to find a way to project. And if that's what's involved in transhumanism games, that I'm all for it. And I want to play some of those and try some of that out. But I'd also like to see it interjected into movies, literature, things of that nature. I think that's something that can push us forward because it can capture the public imagination, and perhaps then it won't just be that single technology driving us forward and we're still fighting the same demons that we fight every day.
Yes, so more of a multifaceted approach in terms of the variety of media, as well as the message that those media convey regarding what human existence would be like with this array of future technologies. Go ahead, Brent.
Yeah, I was thinking about a few things when Francesco was talking about. I've thought about that concept and with reference to the Queens Gambit after some conversations that you and I had, Francesco. And earlier in the week, a couple weeks ago, I picked up the PlayStation virtual reality console, and I've been messing around with that. And I've got the Iron Man virtual reality game, and I was playing the game, and you're in his house, and you're walking around, and I walk over to his bookshelf, and you can like pick up the books and see what he's reading. And the first book I picked up was like Transhumanism and Art. And I was like, whoa, I like had to like take a screenshot and stuff. It like really surprised me. Yeah, that they were like actually using it. Yeah. And so that I thought was pretty cool. And then kind of what David's talking about, just like the narrow scope of a lot of this sci-fi and these different types of artistic representations of the transhumanist movement and things. I would agree that the narrow scope is something that I see a lot of, in the sense that it's always these dystopian themes and things like that. These end of the world Skynet type movies. And I saw this movie the other day that I was actually really disappointed about, because here's the converse is this one was about the singularity, but it was a rom-com, and I didn't realize it was a rom-com. I thought it was, I just like read the description, started watching, and the next thing you know, there's this super intelligent, that's what it was called, super intelligence. And there was this super intelligent computer helping this woman catch this guy in her dream, that's of the man of her dreams. And I was really disappointed by that, honestly. But I was really interested and intrigued by the fact that they were presenting these ideas and thoughts to that type of crowd. And so, I think it is happening slowly but surely.
I think one great way to portray that is definitely, as a gentleman before you was mentioning, in media, and showing it in a more positive light. Let's take some transhumanism technology, like biotechnology, ethical biotechnology, right? And put it into like a small, hey, there's high school musicals, right? Well, put it into like a high school story where, kids are going to school and maybe they suffered from some kind of illness, and all of a sudden this technology and help them improve and help them express themselves a bit better. Like the example I used of, couple weeks ago with the autistic girl who communicated who she was and what she knew and what she was all about through a computer, because she couldn't do it verbally, right? She was limited by the technology that was housing her, right? The body, right? So I feel that we can utilize these platforms to communicate all different aspects, multidimensional aspects, from governments to the medical field, to culture, so many ways to communicate in a positive light. And actually, I don't know if it was you or Kennedy actually shared something that reminded me that about a few months ago, I watched an old episode of the Batman animated series, and it showed the future of the world of tomorrow. It was, Bruce Wayne went to this like museum. And I was like, wow, this is what they thought the future was going to look like in like 1990 something. You know what I mean? But it's amazing because it was that. It was that aspiration. It's that human, the wonder. And speaking of virtual reality, you got to play No Man's Sky in virtual reality, because that's another way to kind of catapult you into the future and seeing what life could be like from an astronaut's point of view. And that's another important thing that can be brought home through virtual reality. What astronauts experience when they go out into space, and all of a sudden they have this expansive bird eye view of the world, and it's consciousness expansive, right? It changes them, fundamentally. All right. But it's funny because it's not that it changes them, it opens them up and brings them closer to who they truly are, And so when they realize that, they feel at home. It's like, wow, this is what it's all about. You know what I mean? Like, here we are in this little speck in the universe, and we're fighting stupid wars, and we're doing stupid things, and we keep repeating the same things, fighting the same old demons. How can we all collectively get together and find the common values and bridge gaps instead of investing more money into wars? Let's stop with the same, because the definition of insanity is repeating the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. I mean, humanity keeps doing the same damn thing over and over again. So let's find a different direction. And I think that virtual reality, media, social media, is ultimately the best way right now that we can go forward and really put it into the homes of people around the world. And if they don't have access to technology, then let's get groups together, activist groups, and go to these places and show them, educate them, through books, through art. It's definitely possible. It's just we need to have more exposure on these kind of conversations to get it started.
Yes, indeed.
To continue on that, I think the gaming is a great convergent medium which combined music, movies, game dynamic, and literature in one place, and you can communicate these ideas through games very efficiently, because you emerge in this world. You're not just observing the movie and that's it. You go in and you live this world. And I don't know, this amazed me about Deus Ex and Cyberpunk 2077 is that 30-40% of the time you're reading, because they drop around all these books and notes and stories, and you're just reading about world. You read different articles, you read different piece of literature to like emerge into the world. So the games, it's amazing medium which allow us to penetrate our ideas, and transhumanist ideas into the culture.
Yes, it's actually right now would be like the perfect time, because the industry has skyrocketed in revenue. They're projected that it's bigger than the movie and music industry combined because of COVID. That's in the perfect storm for gaming.
I think that there's I read something that was saying it's bigger than sports too, even something I was reading.
And of course, people right now are in many cases confined to their homes or limited in where they can go, what they can do outside. And I think games are essential right now in order to, one, give people a way to occupy their time in a constructive manner. And two, as Francesco pointed out, to bridge certain gaps. I wonder if there's a space in these games for common experiences that promote understanding and overcome divisions. 2020 has been an unprecedentedly divisive year because various, let's say, mainstream influences have attempted to segment people into these demographics, either based on political beliefs or based on circumstantial identity, race, gender, ethnicity, all of those markers that transhumanists are trying to transcend, essentially, and find some sort of common humanity, some set of common aspirations that will unite us all. And I wonder, is there a potential for games to cultivate that common experience, relate to people from all of these groups, from all across the political spectrum, and get them to understand that the goals that we ought to share for human betterment are a lot more important than whatever relatively small differences we have with one another.
Yeah, those are definitely great points. I'd like to go back to something Brent said, which I've always agreed with. I think that the movie industry, in particular, has really failed miserably in terms of pushing transhumanist themes. If you look at nearly all Hollywood movies, technology is painted as this nefarious negative force that threatens to destroy society and the globe. And of course, this is really very harmful in terms of obviously it pollutes people's minds and it sends the wrong message. And the reality is far different from that. But I think though what we're going to have to do is several things. One, I think it's really important for us to leverage influential transhumanists, people in terms of changing the cultural zeitgeist. People like DJ Steve Aoki, who has a large following. He is a transhumanist, and Elon Musk, whether he admits it or not, he's a transhumanist. And they're just a lot of people like that. And so I think that we should leverage the networks of these very influential people. Sometimes it's as simple as them making a single mention of it, right? Someone who's an influencer, right? Sorry to use a buzzword, but someone who's an influencer. Imagine if on their social media, in front of their fans, were to mention transhumanism. That right there could do just so much for the movement, right? So I think that's one thing. The second thing is there's a question about how can we sort of change public perception. I believe one of the ways we can do that is by providing results. What do I mean by that? Well, we need every available man and woman who's interested in longevity and human improvement to be involved in it somehow, right? And it may be as simple. It may be as simple as well, it's not that simple, but it may be that they can contribute in ways such as writing, so the books, movies, and so forth, but also biotech companies, and every little bit we do that pushes us closer to our goals is really helpful. So, and I think too that providing results will change people's minds, right? So the people who are skeptical about longevity and increasing lifespan, once we provide some results, they'll get on board.
Yes, it seems that essentially a lot of these virtuous cycles, these positive feedback loops are involved, in that if we have a success, we can leverage it into further successes. But of course, sometimes those initial successes are the hardest to get because you still need a critical mass of people who share the underlying vision, who are willing to work for it during those early days when there isn't yet widespread public support, when the Transhumanist Party still has about 3,100 members rather than 31 million members. And how we get from here to there, I think, is the crucial question. And in some cases, I would say the earliest steps matter the most. Francesco has some experience in growing a transhumanist community because Transhumanism, the Future of Humanity, now has over 15,000 members, per my recollection. So it would be interesting, Francesco, to hear some of your insights regarding how the group has grown, what has enabled it to grow, and moreover, when one grows a transhumanist community, how does one keep it transhumanist in the sense that it stays true to its original purpose, its original principles, and as new people come in, they get integrated successfully into the group instead of turning it into something completely different or unrelated?
Yeah, so that's been very challenging as the group has grown in size. You have various backgrounds, cultures, ideologies, all blending in and trying to understand what this is. Coming in with their own interpretation of transhumanism, which, for the most part, from what I've seen, is a misconstrued. They're on the right track, but it's on the opposite end of the spectrum, something along the lines of posthumanism, right? We see that a lot in the transhumanism community. And I don't want to, the thing about my community is this: I always wanted to treat my particular transhumanist community as an extension of my classroom, that I used in my philosophy class, where everyone is welcome. I don't care, what your religious background is, what your ideologies are, because ultimately it's a forum, right? We're not there physically harming each other, right? And there are measures for that too, harassment and all the policies that Facebook has, but it's all about educating one another and finding common ground, and basically allowing those to understand what the movement is. And then you don't have to agree with it. That's the thing. I don't expect people to agree with what it is, but to still understand what it is. Okay, you don't have to agree with these aspirations. We're not forcing it down your throat, but it's an educational space where we're up to date with current events. What's going on around the world, in terms of technologies that are relevant to transhumanism, and its aspirations. What's been challenging is trying to politely correct those who come from a different background, or trying to push a different agenda, who are, by all means, biohackers, and they're transhumanists, from a physical standpoint, right? But transhumanism is more than just looking and feeling advanced. It's about being advanced, right? How would an advanced civilization communicate, right? How would they think? What would they strive for? And that's what I'm trying to portray to my community. So you come in, and the way I look at it is that you may have a few who make noise, right? But if the majority just sit and watch those who are making noise, that will drown out, like the silence would actually drown out those who are making noise, because they'll stand out like a sore thumb. And I'm not going to concern myself so much with those who are trying to put it in the wrong direction, because if you're trying to fight those battles, you're never gonna move forward with what you're trying to really establish, because there's gonna be a lot of that. It's just part of human nature. Okay, it's just gonna be part. It's what we're trying to resolve. But I think that the way that you do it is not by force feeding; it's by just being the example, right? So continue to educate, continue to stand your ground, and don't become what you hate, right? So don't give into all those things that you are trying to stop, and then become the same as your enemy from a different perspective. I think that the most important thing is that ignorance is by far, in my opinion, the biggest human epidemic. And if you can correct that through education, and acts of kindness and compassion, and portraying, actually exemplifying and being that example to people, then they're going to look at you and say, okay, well, it's as common as having an argument with somebody. And if only one person's arguing and you don't give into the argument, it's not chaos. It's one looking in the mirror and saying, wow, I should just stop, because this is just getting ridiculous. So I feel like you have to tap into the human psyche, and play around with that in a way where you can get someone to see your perspective without force feeding it, by just simply being the example, be the change you want to see. All these cliche, things that have been around for decades and centuries, that wise people before us have tried to pass down to generations, whether it was Jesus, or whether it was Buddha, whether it was Krishna, whether it was all these Carl Sagan and Einstein. There's one thing in common, is that they understood the overarching like message for humanity. And it was humans that decided, oh, well, let's take that and let's twist it, and let's create a religion, let's create this. And that's what humans do. Humans like creating little groups and whatnot. And then they take the whole and separate into puzzle pieces, and they try to put the pieces back together. And that's just what humans do. I think what separates transhumanism from all these other movements is that we're not trying to separate the pieces. We're really trying to put it all back together and move forward together.
Yes, indeed. And it's interesting that a lot of the, let's say, suboptimal behaviors we see in various social media communities dedicated to transhumanism really stem from the fact that transhumanists too are human and they're subject to the same flaws that humans are. And just because one subscribes to a certain set of ideas, even a very good and forward thinking set of ideas about transcending those limitations, doesn't mean that one has eradicated those limits within oneself. And I think some people, they do have a certain caricatured view of transhumanism. I think sometimes that view comes from the critics of transhumanism who say, oh, these transhumanists, they're trying to do away with our essential humanity. And some self-proclaimed transhumanists, they say, well, okay, I embrace that position and I want to do away with our essential humanity. And really, it doesn't come from a transhumanist set of motives as such. It comes from more of a rebellion for the sake of rebellion type of mindset.
And a disdain for the detrimental aspects of humanity. And so, you know, again, differentiating posthumanism and transhumanism, posthumanism is taking these technologies, not David Seraf's ideologies, is taking the opposite end of the spectrum, okay, and eradicating our human nature, whereas transhumanism is trying to improve, enhance, optimize human nature. You know, it's what Nietzsche would say. You know, how do you overcome man, the detrimental aspects of man, not leaving man behind, but not being a monkey in a machine. We, as transhumanists, that is not the goal. And this is actually on a basic level. I'm an assistant manager where I work, and one thing that my old manager used to say that really stuck with me for a long time was, you know, I could hire any key holder or assistant manager that just turns the key. A monkey can turn the key. You know, there are other attributes that come along with being, you know, a person of that position. And so there's a personal responsibility. I think that not acknowledging or respecting these responsibilities, ethics, and whatnot, you take the potential and you create chaos. Okay, and you amplify chaos, and it's just like taking, you know, performance enhancement drugs. Okay, let's use an example. If you suffer from any particular condition, and this particular drug has the potential to amplify that negative aspect, this is what you can do with technology, and we don't want to do that. Okay, we're trying to find ways, not in the Clockwork Orange, if anyone's familiar with that movie, where we're trying to you know, force anyone to change. Okay, but I think that by being the example and creating a world where there are these groups that have seen and understood what humanity needs to be to move forward together, to alleviate wars, to alleviate poverty, to alleviate all these things. And a lot of times the challenges are in this one-dimensional thinking about how things are today. Like, oh, well, there's these policies that we can't do these things right now because it's money and because this. But I like the Jacques Fresco perspective, whereas if you're trying to solve an issue, don't put a Band-Aid on it. Get to the core of the issue. Forget money, forget all that stuff. How do you solve it? And then let's talk about how to get there. Because a lot of these things, there's these external restrictions that prohibit people from really thinking expansively, because they feel that they're restricted by, well, how am I going to get funded? We're thinking in such zero type zero civilization problems. You know what I mean? Like, we're, you know, on that scale, we have to think beyond that. As transhumanists, we have to really think beyond that and bring that future closer to home. And the way we do that is not using the politics of today, the cultures of today, but to embody that future that we're looking for and live it, actually be it. And the more you do that, the more you inspire. And you look at something as simple as the mockery of the internet age, right? When the internet was first introduced by, you know, Bill Gates and all that, and like, oh, well, we don't need the internet, or we don't need Wikipedia. And then as soon as you implement it, you know what? They cannot stop the future. You just put it out there, people get influenced, and then that's the way the world, you know, runs. So
yes, and I think as these technologies get rolled out, we certainly see an increasing rate of adoption. Some people are skeptical at first. There are some enthusiastic early adopters, and eventually, if the enthusiastic early adopters stick with the technology and show its value, then other people will come to appreciate it and come to use it as soon as they see some direct application to themselves, to their own lives. And there's always, I think, going to be a spectrum of adoption. There are still some people who hesitate to use computers, for example, but we increasingly live in a world where to make that kind of decision really leaves one disconnected from a lot of what is happening. And I wonder, in many cases, is that just a dynamic that we're going to have to let happen with other advances as well, that we need a determined group of core initial adopters to advocate, say, for emerging biotechnologies or virtual reality technologies, as you mentioned, for perhaps larger scale developments like space travel, for instance, where most people aren't going to experience it for a while, but we need that initial stage to really flourish in order to lay the groundwork for the next stages where more and more people are going to be able to come on board and see the direct relevance to their own lives.
I think it was Jason Silva, and I'm sorry if I'm taking anybody else's time in this discussion, but this one I definitely want to hit home here is that Jason Silva, another from Brain Games, I think it is. He's a futurist, also a philosopher, and he mentioned recently on the power of virtual reality and how it can catapult someone to experience something without going through all the steps and all the hurdles. You just kind of throw them into the fire, right? And then they experience it. And I think that that's one way people can, especially with the way that we live today, especially out in the West here, such busy lives and people have a lot of other things going on. No one wants to sit there and think or reflect, or it's very hard. So if you provide these technologies, you make them more readily available for people to just like I need to sit down and watch TV. Okay, well, sit down and let's go to the future. You know what I mean? Like it's a paradigm shift. It's a paradigm shift on a global scale is what we really need.
Well, that's so true, Francesco, that it goes back to what I was saying about providing results. I mean, look, anybody with heart disease who's gotten stents or a pacemaker, could they imagine being without it? And in the future, someone with diabetes who will get a bionic pancreas, they won't be able to live, literally, they won't be able to live without it. They won't want to live without it, right?
They won't be able to look back. Once they're there, they won't be able to look back. And that's exactly what you said. The results will speak for themselves. And that's what I mean by my community. Back to your question earlier, is that I'm not trying to change the ignorance mind, right? I'm trying to just continue to show what it is that we're about. And eventually that will supersede all the ignorance and all that. And at least I'm hopeful through results, right? And something on a smaller scale too, someone says, okay, well, I can't imagine living to 150. Well, that's because you've only seen 80, 100, right? But what if you never knew your age? You just kept living, right? But you live healthy, right? Age is just a number, but people think in these one-dimensional, you know what I mean, within their own little bubble. And I think that it's our duty as transhumanists to expand that perspective.
Well, that's so true. No, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, kind of adding on to what you both are talking about. For me, one thing that one area of transhumanism that I like to reference when talking to people who are still kind of uncovering what it is, as I think I mentioned it to you, Francesco, is Buddhist transhumanism, and kind of going in line with, Bruce Lee and things like that. This idea of transcendence of self. And because a lot of people want to point at humanity as the root of all these problems. You were talking about how do we solve these problems by going to the core root of it. And a lot of people want to point their finger at humanity as a whole, hence why posthumanism kind of has its attraction. But I think that instead of being like, all right, it's all of you and not me.
It
I
starts
think
within.
realizing that we are all individually part of humanity and that we can make
Right.
these changes on an internal basis, and that can help kind of in those types of perspectives. I think it's a lot more palatable, because then when you try to start thinking about these different technologies, we think about those technologies in terms of what humanity is today, and we haven't been able to overcome these greed and cycles of ego and these different things that are inherently human, that are booby trapping us essentially. And I think that we really need to overcome some of those things, but it's not about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's about figuring out how to overcome these key innate human capabilities. Tom Ross talks about how we have these evolutionary traits that really suited us much better, when we were hunting and gathering and identifying problems and
Great example.
seeking survival. Exactly. And instead of we're now at a point where we don't really need to do that, and we need to figure out how to bring on this new usher in this new wave of humanity. And I
Right,
think
Well,
that,
right.
yeah, this idea separation between.
Yeah, and hopefully we get
yeah.
to the point where I used to say, it's the ego is when we reflect back and say, why did I say what I said, think what I thought, feel what I felt, do what I did, right? And then so when we get to the point where we're more self-aware and we reflect more so than we react, and we listen more than just waiting to speak, and do all these different things that over time have shown to help us be better individuals, not just to ourselves but to others around us, right? To be able to communicate and understand one another instead of trying to argue and dominate one another, collaborate instead of compete, all these different things that humans have been indoctrinated to believe, that have misconstrued and misguided our perception of reality and how we really should be, to live a happier, healthier life amongst one another, regardless of our differences. I look at nature and you see all different trees, different leaves, different things, but guess what? It's all harmoniously within the ecosystem of the planet, right? So I feel that that's how humans have to look at themselves, and humanity as a whole, as one race, rather than all these different races, and it's all one big lie.
Yes, indeed. And you pointed out that a lot of these flaws, they stem from humans' evolved nature in response to an environment that no longer exists. Back when people were in these small hunter-gatherer tribes of 100 to 150 people, where every day was a struggle for just the basics of survival, where anything you encountered outside of your tribe was a predator or a hostile tribe or some hostile force of nature or a disease that you had no way to understand or to control. And as a result, people evolved to develop these very strong in-group loyalties and out-group hatreds, essentially. And it was adaptive in this kind of bare subsistence manner for a while, because it allowed people to scrape by day to day. But as soon as technologies were developed that created more of a positive sum existence, where you could actually grow crops, you could build tools, you could invent language and communicate, then all of those mindsets became quite detrimental. And they held back a lot of progress for many millennia. But in particular, I think they held back progress because not just the majority of people were subject to those mindsets, but even people who tended to be more forward thinking were still vulnerable to those mindsets. And I think this is where there should be a focus on the community of early adopters, because sometimes, even within that community, it's possible to have tribalism take hold. It's possible to have these suboptimal, more primal dynamics arising out of human psychology dominate. And Francesco, you mentioned this problem that sometimes occurs of people coming in with certain preconceived notions or perhaps a distorted view of what transhumanism is. But if they're particularly charismatic, or if they're entertaining in a certain way to a certain group of people, they may kind of insinuate their strain into the mix to perhaps not an ideal outcome, where a lot of people start thinking, well, this is transhumanism, some crazy display of shock value that is cyberpunkish in a certain sense, may get misconstrued as transhumanism, even though it has nothing of the philosophy in it, even though it may just be more conventional dystopian shock jock type of a display. So I think this speaks to the obstacles within that a lot of people in the transhumanist community at least need to be conscious of and think about and to overcome. So Francesco, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. What can people do to essentially be on guard for these kinds of tendencies in others, but also in themselves?
It's a challenging question, and one that I don't readily have an answer for, to be honest with you. I'm not going to pretend to have a solution to that. It's been challenging, but the only way that I've approached it, and this is where I retreat to Bruce Lee's philosophy, where he would say, if you let everything that people say get to you, right, and shake your truth and what you stand for, you'll never be at peace, and you can never move forward, with clear vision. And I feel that when those obstacles arise, people who come in with those charismatic, ideological views, and we've seen a few without mentioning any names, they may have the same aspirations as transhumanism, but are going about it the wrong way. Ways that are detrimental to the fundamental things that we've just mentioned about the way that we communicate. I think the only thing that I can do as an administrator of the community, at least within my own Facebook group, is to continue, whenever there's an uproar or some tension that can throw off transhumanism off track, all I can do is respond with, this is what it really is, and continue to enforce that. Ultimately, I do think that we will get to the point where those who are trying to, like you said earlier, take their own ideologies and mix it in with, that's no different than what religion has done. It's no different than what politics do. That's human nature, that I believe that the true transhumanists who understand the core principles of transhumanism ultimately is greater than this little Facebook group. Okay, we have aspirations beyond those, because I truly believe that voice will speak louder, and those actions will speak louder. And the only way to silence or to overpower that ignorance is to continue showing transhumanism under a positive light. Well, again, bringing up the questions that may pose challenges and whatnot, which I think is very important to still discuss, but ultimately pushing forward with our vision. And I think that that's the most important way to do it, whether through media, art, education in schools. I think one challenge we also face is that when people are set in their ways, especially adults, the elderly, it's very difficult to change. I see within my own family. I mean, Fox News is on every day. It's what I mean? That's the way, that's their reality, right? So they're just regurgitating what they hear, and that's their perception of reality, right? So I think that what's important is that this education needs to be implemented at a academic level, whether it's as early as kindergarten, for, elementary school. I'm not even kidding. And philosophy is not just about the philosophers. It's not just about politics. It's not just about what is the meaning of life. No. Philosophy on a basic level is finding who you are and finding meaning in your life, and then that can project forward outwards as you get older, and you go on this path in life where you start to question things and to think critically, to reason logically, and just be a better version of yourself. And I think that if you implement that early on, you have more influence on a younger mind, not to control what they think, but to teach them how to think, right? To have, not what to think, but to think critically, to be a more optimal version of themselves. And I think that starts from my own experience when I was in high school, for example, being a teenager, going into high school, new environment, more people, not really knowing too much about what I wanted to do and, where I was going and trying to fit in. I think that even as a freshman, and at least in the Western academics here, having the ability to have a course, where you are learning more about yourself. We emphasize here, when you leave high school, you leave higher education, what are you going to do? Right. Well, I think the emphasis should be who are you going to be? Like, who are you? And I think that in life there's many roads, different paths and whatnot, but it's just like one philosophy that one of my philosophers once said, that about free will, you go into a classroom, you see 30 chairs and you think there's 30 options, but you're still going to pick that one chair every time. You're going to go sit in that one part. And it's because there is an underlying part of you that you may not be aware of that knows before you know. And it's the same as going through life and discovering at 100 years old that you could run. Well, you've always been able to run, but you never took the time to actually realize that, right? Actualize that. And so I think that the more you know yourself, the more you're able to determine where you're going, and what kind of impact you're going to make in life, whether it's to your family on a micro scale, on a micro level, to yourself, or on a macro scale, right? So I do think it starts with education, number one. And as a philosophy, with a philosophy background, I think that one of my main goals and within the transhumanism community is to implement self-development, self-realization, actualization courses, and also mindfulness, where we can at least establish the foundations of transhumanism before even technology gets involved, right? Let's first find out who we are before we move forward and become something that we have no idea what it is.
Yes, indeed. And it is unfortunate that philosophy does not really get taught in the schools, even at the high school level, for many students who only may encounter occasional references to philosophers as part of their history course, for instance, or if they take political science, they might encounter a few philosophers there. But I recall when I was a student and I was in the public school system, I did not enjoy that experience, in part because I thought that there was a lot of busy work, a lot of repetition, but no focus at all on many of the substantive questions. And even when philosophy was mentioned, it was kind of in this detached academic sense. And a lot of philosophy since the mid 20th century in particular has become this academic postmodernism that is nearly inscrutable to ordinary people.
It is not. Honestly, even those who are in the field have had an undesirable experience as majors in the field, because at least in the West, it's not like in Eastern philosophy, where a lot of the philosophical pursuits are internal, right? Finding who you are, and what you can get out of your life on a deeper understanding, and in relation with others around the world. And I think that in Western philosophy, it's like, what can you do with philosophy? What can philosophy answer? And then that's where science comes in and says, well, don't really need philosophy, because you can't really do much with it, right? Well, that's, instead of thinking of it as like, what can you do externally with philosophy, how can it help you improve you as a person? And then apply those methods, those tools that you've learned through philosophy to the field that you're in, to relations with people, to perspectives, I think you have to redefine what philosophy is in the West, or at least reevaluate what the core what the love of knowledge, right? What, like, that, the love of knowledge, not just external knowledge, but knowledge from within. You know what I mean? Who you are, and what this is all about.
Yes, and it's interesting too that in the West, philosophy started in this way also. So Socrates spoke about the importance of knowing oneself and living the examined life, and he intentionally did not give answers to broader existential questions, but he asked people to engage in this kind of questioning. Aristotle had a conception of personal virtue that essentially then went on to characterize everything that one did, but it's not through the specific actions that a person got his or her identity. It is through the virtues that the person then went on to act in certain desirable ways, but that person didn't have to be locked into a particular occupation. For instance, Aristotle himself was quite a polymath, and he had a lot of examinations into the natural sciences, which for his time were quite comprehensive. He didn't quite get his theory of the cosmos correct, but he tried. He undertook a much more systematic study than any of his predecessors did. And I think somewhere along the way, there has occurred a kind of compartmentalization, not just of philosophy, but of all other disciplines, where people came to be expected, instead of living a kind of integrated life, to just specialize narrowly in some one thing and outsource everything else to other people. And while specialization has certain advantages, it's certainly not a sufficient way to live. It's also detrimental, I think, to define oneself in terms of a career, because then some people, when they retire, or if their circumstances change, if the economy changes, they become involuntarily unemployed. They lose a sense of meaning, even though that was just a thing they did for money.
I encountered, you know, what's funny? I was on the way home today. I was thinking about this is something that's been for the past, since I've been, you know, interested in transhumanism and actually being exposed to philosophy at the age of 16. It's a question that I brought up in class, and it's something that's still prevalent today. Is, you know, people attribute their worth and who they are to what they do, rather than who they are. You know, and I think that that's once that's over, it's like, oh, well, what do I do with myself, and you know, what do I do now, right? Well, live. Now you get to live. You know, now you get to actually, you know, engage in you know, what life has to offer. And it's funny, my cousin, actually, I want to mention him. He's a neuroscientist from PhD student from Stony Brook University, about the same age as me. We always, you know, engage in these kind of topics, and he actually published 2 stories in a scientific journal. One is called "The Job Arcade," where it shows a future where people do receive, you know, basic income, and then they don't have to work anymore, and it's not about money, right? People are doing things because they want to do it. You know, if there's no money involved, would you still do what you do, right? Would you still love what you love? And I feel like money, for example, is one of the biggest challenges, because it creates problems that weren't there if it wasn't even a thing, right? So we place such an emphasis on money and all the issues it causes in turmoil, causes within families, within, you know, self you know, confidence, and all these different things that don't have to be a thing if money wasn't involved. So I feel that in this story, he writes about someone who is not used to this future, and he leaves home, and his wife's happy. She's an artist, so she's, you know, coloring and doing all the things that she does, that she tried to do before, when she had to work, she couldn't really engage in these you know, hobbies and passions. But her husband would go to this place called the Job Arcade, and would pay the money that they've been given to play these simulation jobs, and try to simulate what life was like when he had a job. And then he would, in the irony, the mockery of all this was that the absurdity is that he would tell the owner of this place, "Can you make it more real? Because I don't feel the stress of the stress of paying bills, and I don't know what life, I can't live this life." Like, he actually missed the misery, and that just to show. And he got published, and the scientific journal said, "This is a brilliant, funny, you know, take." And then the wife thought he was cheating on her, but really he was out with his friend, dressing up for work for a simulation that's not even real, and wasting all the money on a job that wasn't providing anything but this empty gratification of something that only brought misery. And so that's the idea, that people aspire their self-worth to what they do, a job. And I don't think as it's a challenge, because it's something that's so ingrained in our culture, not just in the West but all over. You know, if you're not doing something of value that produces something, what am I worth? You know, and I think that's where it has to start too, from education, just from a very fundamental standpoint. I think those things have to change, and we can do that. We can show that through media. We can show that through art. You know, what life could be like if those things weren't a factor.
Yes,
You
indeed.
know, it's funny because it kind of reminds me of that episode of Star Trek Next Generation,
Yeah,
where they find those cryonic patients that were floating in space, and they brought them onto the ship, and one of them being like a big banker type person. He dabbled in Wall Street, and he thought, he's in the future. Man, his fortunes must be sky high now. He's going to be living like a king. But Picard gives him that little reality check of saying, well, no, your money doesn't exist. In fact, no money exists in our society anymore. You aspire to live however you so please, but it's not hampered from any of these limitations and barriers that you were so used to and profited off of. And that I remember that person's response, the character's response being like, they can't believe that they live in this type of future. They don't know what to do with themselves. They feel alone, or feel like if there's no money, which is something that they've always known their entire life, then what is there in life? And it was
right.
always hard that hammered it in. It was like, well, now you're finally alive. You're able to live. So
And
don't mess
that,
it
that
up.
that goes hand in hand with people living in their own bubble and what virtual reality can do. Like, not everyone has the luxury of being able to travel around the world, right? Well, let's bring Japan to you. Let's bring Sweden to you. Let's bring, what I mean, through virtual reality experiences, and see, like, wow, life, there's more to life than beyond my neighborhood. Wow, you know what I mean? Like, and so I think that when you can, and that's ways to create, that's a virtual way to create bridges for people, so they can connect with cultures. Bourdain, the chef, would go around the world and said that, that was the most fulfilling thing about life, is to see other cultures and see how they live and whatnot, and what they eat, and and just, it was so inspiring. And I think Tokyo, Japan was one of his favorite places to visit. But not everyone has that luxury, right? So we can utilize technologies, and I think Black Mirror did that beautifully in that one episode, San Junipero, seeing what life could be like, the afterlife, while still being alive through some virtual reality, but you're still living, you're still experiencing life, but without any issues, right? Like, you're just living now. And I think that seeing what transhumanism can do, on a global scale, despite your background, your cultures, your upbringings, just to enhance your life. I think that's something that we have to strive for and continue to emphasize.
There's a story that a lot of friends back over in China have talked about, where they would reference people who are so stuck in their bubble of life, so stuck in their ability to, or their inability to not see the forest for the trees. They would call them frogs, because it references back to the frog in the well,
Hmm.
whose life was solely based on what they could see at the very top of the well, the sky. That was their reality. But once
Right.
something came into the well and tried to explain to the frog what life is like beyond it, they just can't fathom it. They're like, no, that can't be real. This is my reality. This is what is real, what I see. I am that
Right.
frog at the well. And so we deal with a lot of people that are like that. They are those frogs. They're not, either they're incapable, or they're unwilling to move beyond that well view, or that sight, and
Correct.
view the world beyond what their limited uh, take is on it. You know.
Right.
I actually, with that in mind, that reminds me of course, the allegory of the cave. And the idea of the allegory of the cave was, of course, that when they finally leave the cave and they see what reality for what it is, they venture back into the cave, because they don't want that reality. They want
Hmm.
what was familiar. And with that in mind, something that I try to drive home when I'm talking about transhumanist concepts to people who aren't really into it is the fact that it's not, again, to differentiate between transhumanism and posthumanism, it's not about the fact that you won't still have those options. It's not that there aren't going to be restaurants where your food's cooked by a human, or it's not like you're there's not going to see a doctor who's a human doctor, but at the end of the day, I'd rather see some kind of medical facility where they're utilizing these highly intelligent artificial intelligence based programs that are using open source technology to
Right.
at real time have all the
The the
information of everyone right
the,
there at
the
their fingertips, versus some doctor whose degree is 15 years old who thinks he knows better than everyone. But
exactly.
at the same time, there's plenty of people that would disagree with me, and so I try to merge these things and bring them together by reminding people that it's not about transhumanism is not entirely about this post-human perspective of eradicating these ideas. But I mean, I have with my PlayStation virtual reality, I've got Job Simulator just so that I
Yeah.
can get it in while I still can.
That's great. That's great.
That
Yeah, I
is
mean,
good.
I think the big paradigm shift really is to see technology and government and whatever is needed in this to be sustainable, to have a sustainable future is technologies and policies that serve humanity. How can they better humanity? Not how can they put more money in pockets of corporations, and that's it's people over profit, and that's something that I've written about, something that I'm going to continue advocating for within transhumanism is when you put money aside, when you don't what is the genuine intention of your endeavor, right? What is it that you are striving to accomplish? Things that Jack Fresco would say, materialism. We live in a society where things are meant to break, and then we try to solve the issue with another issue, and that's a way of that's an antiquated, obsolete way, in my opinion, that won't serve a purpose in an advanced civilization. It wouldn't fly in that episode of Star Trek, and it won't fly in the future that we're trying to to actualize through transhumanism.
Well,
So
that's
we
it.
have, go ahead.
Sorry, General. I'm just going to say one of the biggest benefits about transhumanism is it allows us to reflect upon what it means to be human. I always tell people transhumanism isn't about being a machine. Transhumanism is about being a better human being.
You gave me chills. You gave me goosebumps. That's absolutely true. Absolutely love it.
It is. I mean, look, transhumanism is not against human nature. Transhumanism is human nature, right? And I really believe we've got to drive home these points in everything that we do, every communication we do, every project we're involved in, right? It's about enhancing humanity. It's not about eliminating humanity, right?
No.
So I think that if we can have a great deal of consistency in terms of the messages that we're portraying to the public, it's definitely going to go a long way.
Absolutely. It's the passion. It's the passion for humanity and life, right? And fully realized and actualized. That's the idea.
Yes, indeed. So Alexandria Black has some interesting questions. She asks, how would people know what self-sovereignty looks like, especially in this philosophical sense of understanding oneself, taking agency, if they were always denied that sovereignty? And to Brent's point, she references that perhaps some people might embrace the devil they know rather than the angel that they don't know. So are we here to introduce those angels, metaphorically speaking, to people for the first time?
And on that notion, just to interject quickly, something that I was thinking about a moment ago for the question that you asked, Francesco, about how to kind of differentiate and how to kind of figure out who's who in all of this. And something for me that I kind of use to gauge things like that is where people's energy lies in terms of if they're being compelled to do things out of love or out of fear. And if they're obsessed with this love for the things that they do, the love for, and not like an extreme narcissism necessarily, but what I mean by just love, and they're trying to embrace it and see more of it. Or is it that they see all these awful things that they fear and that they want to focus on that to eradicate it? Because it's when all you're focusing on is these terrible things to eradicate, you're just one step closer to, as Francesco says, putting in a new problem to solve an old problem, or maybe Arun said that, but that was one notion that I was thinking of.
Yeah,
Well,
that's well said.
it's interesting. Fear can sometimes grow out of love in the sense that you fear losing what you love. It's often a response that I give to people who ask, well, are you afraid of death? Is that why you're a transhumanist? And what I tell them is, first of all, what reasonable person wouldn't be afraid of death? Second, why are people afraid of death? It's not just that they think death is some bad thing in the abstract. It's that they actually enjoy living. They want to keep on living. They
Yes,
don't
it's the
want
love
to
of life.
lose life. So perhaps sometimes, because fear is a very visceral emotion, it can be a very intense emotion, people can forget why that fear arose in the first place, what it is ultimately that that fear is responding to. And I do think philosophy can help people get back to the fundamentals in terms of what do they value, what do they want to keep going, what they want to perpetuate. And then if they experience a fear, if they connect it to that, perhaps that could lead them to become more positive in their outlook and in their actions.
Yeah, it's really, really well stated.
Mhm. So another question from Alexandria Black that I would be curious to ask you is, are you familiar with the concept of meta-modernism? And there is a Wikipedia page on meta-modernism that I'm posting in the chat for those who aren't familiar with it. The Wikipedia introduction reads, meta-modernism is a proposed set of developments in philosophy, aesthetics, and culture which emerge from and react to postmodernism. One definition characterizes metamodernism as mediations between aspects of both modernism and postmodernism. Another similar term is post-postmodernism. So essentially, it's a current in philosophy and culture that recognizes some of the flaws and dead ends in postmodernism, the problems with this incessant rejection of truth, or this devolution into essentially hyper-academic philosophy that ceases to have a lot of connection to the real world. And the meta-modernists, they want to reclaim aspects of earlier philosophical traditions like modernism that actually tried to provide something of relevance to everyday human life. So what are your thoughts on that, Francesco?
I'm actually, I haven't really been. I'm not really familiar with the term metamodernism, so I really appreciate the insight on that. But it really hits home. I mean, that's exactly, again, it's amazing. Like, just like transhumanism, coming across transhumanism, like, wow, I've already been doing this. You know what I mean? But now there's a term for it, and that's basically what I'm aspiring to accomplish through philosophy, on a fundamental level, and to establish it as part of transhumanism, is just that. It's I guess the meta modernist approach to transhumanism.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. And to me, it has long seemed that transhumanism offers this crucial ingredient for the next era in philosophy, whether it's Western philosophy or Eastern philosophy or human philosophy more generally, because the various philosophical currents are interfacing with one another to a much greater extent now. But the key, I think, in transhumanism is the reinvigoration of the sense of meaning for people. Right. Whereas postmodernism tried to deconstruct all sources of meaning, we've seen the problems that causes, where people are left aimless in a sense.
Yeah.
And they sometimes take recourse to very suboptimal coping mechanisms, from suicide to joining some pre-modern extremist fanatical group like ISIS, because at least ISIS had a framework for them, however toxic and horrible that framework was. So rekindling that ability to see a better future, the concept of progress, the idea that one can work to achieve progress, both in one's own life and in the broader condition of humanity. That, I think, is crucial even to getting us out of a lot of the current predicaments that humankind faces, but also in order for life to be satisfying, enjoyable, productive for so many more people than experience that today.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So now Alexandria Black makes some suggestions with regard to Hansi Freinacht, Stoa, Game B, and the sense-making community, I think with regard to other representatives of metamodernism. But with regard to our conversation, Francesco, I know that you are quite involved with self-improvement, both
Right.
from the standpoint of physical health and from the standpoint of intellectual exploration. And you've stated before that there are ways to engage in a lot of self-improvement today with benefits for longevity and for mental well-being that don't require spending a lot of money, that don't require doing a lot of risky experiments with oneself, that would be accessible to a lot of people of ordinary means. So I think it would be great for our audience if you could talk about some of those possibilities.
Yeah, actually, one of the most most common, and well respected and also researched, pursuits is meditation. There are different forms. Some are more difficult than others to accomplish, especially if time is a challenge. They call it seated meditation, right? Where you have to quiet the mind and all that. And while there are benefits like transcendental meditation, it's not really transformative. Okay. And what I mean by that is that it may have some health benefits, of course, but as far as transhumanism is concerned, right? The aspirations of not just looking and feeling advanced, but being advanced. Actually applying these principles to everyday life, right? In the way that you communicate with one another, the way that you reason, the way that you think. These can actually be this can be accomplished through a meditation that's actually dates back to samurais. It's called total embodiment meditation. It's actually one of the oldest forms of meditation where you don't have to close your eyes, you don't have to sit down. It's actually practiced in waking moments. So you actually can, in the moment, whether you're doing whatever it is you're doing, could be talking to somebody, could be washing the dishes, could be mopping the floor, anything. You are in the moment and immersed within the experience, and you start to see just you start to be grateful and appreciative of like even being able to be in that moment to do that. And you start to see anything that was stressing you out, you start to realize, wow, you have the ability to compartmentalize those issues, those thoughts, and say, you know what, I don't want to think about that right now. I am in the moment. I am doing this, and I'm going to do the best of my ability. And when you start practicing, yes, it's the flow, as Andrew said, it's that flow that you engage in, you immerse yourself in, where things just are happening. You lose a sense of time, right? There is no time. Well, I have my own discussion we can have another day about time. But as far as the actual experience, it allows you to actually develop a sense of awareness, and presence that is sometimes lost when we give into the impulsive side of ourselves, or the reactionary, emotionally charged side, where we respond in a way that isn't really representative of our values, who we are, and that's the detrimental human aspect nature that we are trying to overcome. And it does not have to be done with technology, but again, this is the idealistic view here, is that we will get to the point through transhumanism where even those who have a difficult time because of mental challenges, or medical restraints, that technology can help them achieve these these moments of being in the flow and not resorting to detrimental behavior. And I think that one movie that I watched actually, but the book was actually better, was called The Peaceful Warrior, where one of the main characters' name actually was Socrates. It was played by Nick Nolte, and he's just a mechanic, and he pumps people's gas, and he sweeps the garage, and he cleans the bathroom, and the character, the younger gentleman in the movie, sees this as wasteful. Like, why are you wasting your time doing all this? If you're so wise and you're so smart, why you just pump gas? Why are you working in a gas station if you're so smart? And he says something so powerful. He says, I don't just pump gas, I don't just mop the floor, I provide service, and I provide service to the best of my ability. And the irony of all this, at the end of the movie, the owner of the gas station is no longer Nick Nolte, he's somebody else. He's got to pump his own gas, so it's kind of like, oh wow, he was very valuable, but the idea was that whatever you do to the best of your ability, and that flow state allows you to do that. And there are methods you can do. You look up total embodiment meditation. That's something that I do. And in the moment, it's when I mentioned earlier on in the session where, if someone's screaming at you, instead of you engaging the same type of behavior, just be a mirror, or as Bruce Lee would say, be like water, and just let it flow, be in the flow, and don't try to control what can't be controlled. Just go with it, and resort to that center. And that center is something that, through practice, through, being able to alleviate the noise and just be in the moment, you do find that center. And a lot of times the external chaos, we attach ourselves to like a movie, but if you see life itself that way, where, you have the ability to step outside and put things in perspective, and don't become consumed by the things that are causing stress and whatever, and realize that at the end of the day, you're still breathing, you're still okay. These things are fine. Those things will work themselves out. Those are just very small things you can do that have a greater impact on just your outlook, and the way that you do things, and the way that you reason through issues and obstacles, challenges. And especially in my position, being in a community like that, I can easily become, bothered by what I see, and and I can start slamming the ban button and mute button and all that. But I think this movement on a greater scale, this movement itself needs level-headed people, those who are able to see through the noise, and maintain composure, and that composure comes through that discipline and the ability to master yourself, master your emotions. Don't become a slave to them. It's included ego. The ego doesn't go anywhere, but you have a hold of the ego. When you can let it have a little bit of fun, but when to retreat. These are all things I've also learned, and refined through self-actualization, Bruce Lee's philosophy. And if you have a chance, pick up the book Be Like Water. It's Bruce Lee's daughter Shannon Lee. She wrote a book recently about self-development, self-improvement through Bruce Lee's philosophies. Just invaluable book. I'm getting chills just talking about it. It's an amazing book, and she does a fantastic job. Explaining, as we said earlier, how do we communicate these ideas and philosophies? Well, you put in a language that can be understood, and she does a fantastic job not overcomplicating things. Simplifying these ideas, and so you can digest them. And then if you want to delve deeper, you can. Listen, we live in a meme generation. People don't have a lot of time, and they don't have the luxury of just spending hours of being educated on these things. So you have to condense it, but be concise, and make it in a way that's digestible. And this book is just 220 pages, and it gets right to the point, and it's a really great self-help book. And I think that there's a lot of ways you can do that, whether it's virtual reality, meditation, again, that don't require any meds, no supplements, nothing. But of course, there are supplements too that you can take that I don't want to endorse today. I don't think I'm in a position to endorse anything in terms of supplements. But I will say from personal experience that there are those out there that can help with cognitive health, and anti-stress supplements like ashwagandha are fantastic. It's actually research. That's one reason I'm mentioning it. And things like L-theanine, common things you see every day. These things can actually help with calming the mind, calming any anxiety, lowering cortisol levels, and being able to function more optimally. That don't require any biotechnological enhancements.
Well, it's kind of interesting. You mentioned of VR and meditation. You briefly mentioned Jason Silva earlier, the techno philosopher, and it's interesting because he was talking about a sort of meditative mindset that we have all experienced to one degree or another whenever we watched films. Whenever we'd sit in a theater and we'd sit back and relax, there'd be that moment in time where you transcend from that seat and you immerse yourself into that film. You see yourself in that moment, or as that character, or even as an outside observer. You're in that moment. It's called the dietic shift, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And and what's great about video gaming, is that it has taken that entertainment and has put that dietic shift into a much more interactive element. And so there are those meditative states in entertainment as well that we find ourselves enveloped.
Music
and unfortunately, with a lot of our always on the go culture now, a lot of people don't take time to just sit back and relax and enjoy something of any kind of entertainment value. But those type of meditative states, it's not Buddhist per se, but it does put you in that mindset to where you start putting yourself in a world that is outside of whatever limitations or issues that you may be going through in your own personal life. And it certainly helped with your own psychological health and everything else.
Yeah, I was referring to that earlier with the overview effect. That's what it was called. I forgot to mention it. With astronauts experience in space, it's that expansive bird's eye view of life, and it just elevates them. It's to a whole different level of consciousness, and something that I experienced. I guess you can call it enlightenment, or a waking moment, an epiphany, is something I experienced in 2012 that actually influenced me to create these communities. I created Transhumanism Future for Humanity in 2014, Deus Ex Community in 2015, and I took that experience that I had, that others have experienced, like Jason Silva, like Carl Sagan, like enlightenment thinkers who have experienced that enlightening experience of just the euphoria. And in that moment, it was music that was my gateway, that kind of channeled that experience for me. And I came to certain realizations and, perspectives that I didn't have prior. I understood metaphysics better. It was conscious expanding. It was an amazing experience. And so I feel that people are capable of doing that. And by the way, I experienced that when I was alone. Many, many amazing things happen when you're in solitude, and actually I embrace boredom. I think boredom is just another way for you to, explore yourself, and the inner world. So I
Blade
think
Runner's soundtrack was really good at achieving that.
And Aaron, I'm sure how many times have you looped the main menu theme in Deus Ex Revolution?
But if you among other tracks from the game, of course.
Oh my God, amazing, absolutely amazing.
Adam's apartment, Detroit Convention Center.
Oh, I'm so passionate about that game. I'm getting chills just hearing you talk about Deus Ex.
Yeah, I live that game. Yeah, so Francesco, going back to, and Brent, going back to what you were talking about, these simple free tools that one can use to improve themselves. I mean, look, we are going to get these huge advancements with science and technology, but there's no reason why we can't by ourselves take small steps every day toward improvement. We should do both. They're not mutually exclusive, right?
Right.
I talk about this all the time. I'm very passionate about Kaizen and daily improvement. And I think we should combine that with look, even if one is not in a position to be involved with cutting edge science and technology, that's fine. You can contribute. The way you can contribute is using methodologies like Kaizen to go for daily improvement by taking small steps. it's a holistic way of looking at things for me, right?
Right.
It's not mutually exclusive. It's not either or, but both and.
Yes, yes. As above and below, it's both. It's not just this or that. It's both. You know, absolutely. I do want to apologize real quick. My dog has been nudging me to take her out again. So you guys carry on. I'll be right back.
All right. Well, we do have an interesting prospect here to look at some of the ways in which this concept of total embodiment meditation can be instantiated in everyday life. For instance, my friend, Dr. Bill Andrews, who is an ultra marathon runner, has often characterized running as a kind of moving meditation. He also has advised to only do it if and when one enjoys it, which is really startling, I think, to most people who are not regular runners to conceive of, well, how can you enjoy running a 100-mile race or a 200-mile race? And I have to admit, I myself am not there at this time with regard to 100-mile races. My record outside has been 33 miles. So I know a little bit about what really long distance running is like. But there are ways to essentially make the experience more enjoyable rather than as a struggle. And some of those have to do with more routine approaches, more scientific approaches to hydration and nutrition, making sure one has adequate and regular intakes of it, but also modulating one's pace in order to not be too strenuous, and also selecting an environment where one enjoys running. So all of those can, I think,
also
help.
music.
Yes, music.
People readily listen to music whenever they're running. It helps get them in that meditative mindset to not focus on the pain or whatever they're going through that's telling them quit running or slow down. You know, that music just helps, what's the word for it? Just black it out and get you focused on that run.
Yes, and I listen to music regularly during the course of my runs. Essentially, all of those choices have the effect of kind of focusing the individual on the more enjoyable aspects of the experience, not that one is feeling some sort of discomfort or pain. By the way, it's possible to run many, many miles without feeling pain. It's possible to run a half marathon or even a marathon without feeling pain if one prepares for it in the appropriate way, if one has enough practice. So getting into those kinds of states more regularly, I think can help one achieve this total embodiment meditation, but it doesn't always come with just willing it. It comes with also setting up the conditions where one's mind can dwell in a more enjoyable realm. And of course, it's beneficial for physical health as well. So, Brent, go ahead.
Going back to what Francesco was saying as well about being like water. I've been reading the last few days the Tao Te Ching, and they talk quite a bit extensively. Lao Tzu talks about being like water, and what you're talking about with running and to not do it unless you're enjoying it. That's a big aspect that they talk about in terms of the Tao and the way is being like water and flowing to it naturally and not forcing things. So that just was definitely relevant, what you're saying, to some ancient philosophies that I've been reading.
Yes, indeed. And Alexandria Black has a comment in the chat. Music helps regulate emotions. And there is a lot of emotional content in music. One can pick music to match a particular desired emotional state. And a friend of mine who is a philosopher wrote a book called Emotion in Life and Music. His name is M. Zachary Johnson. who has a group also on Facebook called Philosophy of Music and Emotions. So I would encourage you to check it out. But the idea is that the content of music, it's not just based on one's individual subjective perceptions. There are actual objective means to encode certain emotions into music. And you can use that if you understand what emotions a piece of music conveys and you want to experience a particular set of emotions. Certain music can help to bring that out. We've had a lot of interesting comments in the chat as well. I'll feature a few of them. John H. pointed out, as knowledge grows, so does specialization. And yes, in some respects, it's difficult for individuals to keep the totality of all knowledge in their minds to be on the cutting edge of innovation in all fields. But at the same time, if one is just solely focused on one sub-discipline, one loses a lot because one doesn't then relate that to the basic human condition and all of the other many-fold events that are happening in the world. So I think some of the greatest value in our era can be brought by people who do pay attention to specialized developments and innovations, but connect various specialties to one another, or bring the fruits of specialized research into everyday life. Because I think a lot of people who are narrowly specialized, they know a lot more than we think they do, but sometimes their research might be so disconnected from everyday experience that we're not seeing its benefits. And the people who can spot the benefits and translate them into something more accessible to large numbers of people, I think can help considerably to bring us into the next era. Then Daniel Twett says, transhumanism will create more and better real-world use cases for philosophy. And indeed, if we ponder about the virtual Enlightenment salons and what we are discussing here, a lot of it relates to the potential of emerging technologies, but also philosophical questions raised by emerging technologies, new dilemmas that we may have to deal with, or new ways of thinking about the world, new possibilities of human experience that these technologies bring about. So I definitely agree. It's not at all the case that science has somehow crowded out philosophy. The advancement of science and technology makes philosophical deliberations even more crucial than they had been in the past. Daniel Twett also says that he's planning for the end of planned obsolescence on every level. And I like that notion. I do think part of progress should be that our devices become more durable, that they don't fail as often, that failure doesn't get programmed into them. And I think there need to be incentives both from the consumer end. Consumers should be demanding these kinds of improvements, as well as at the policy level to encourage the creation of longer lasting devices so that we don't have to buy a new phone every 2 years, for example.
There's also the issue of, you know, what is access and what is yourself, like when it comes to not just regular external devices, but devices that will eventually be included into the body. Even today's devices like cochlear implants and what have you. There are the issues of, well, you've got this company that gave you this cochlear implant, but what happens if you modified it beyond what that company had planned for it? Will they just take it away? Will you know, what is that device to you? And if you have no say in how it is used, if you have no say in how it is applied, and if somebody can just straight up snatch it from you, you know, that issue in particular also has to be addressed as well.
Yes, and ethics, of course, are a part of philosophy, and a lot of policy stems from philosophical positions as well. So what is one's philosophical position on the autonomy of the individual or the rights of the individual? And would that involve, for instance, the right of ownership to one's own data or the devices that one uses? Is there a higher right of individual autonomy and self-ownership that supersedes the asserted right of intellectual property that certain device manufacturers might have? Like if you have something embodied in you, do you start maintaining a certain absolute control over it, notwithstanding somebody else's claims of intellectual property? And I think that's really important from my own position as an individualist and as a person who strongly believes in people having property rights over their own bodies, that once you put something into your body, that needs to become absolutely yours to own and to control. So yes, philosophy does have a lot to say about that, because not every philosophical framework would necessarily embrace that position. But from my standpoint, it is a very crucial position if one wishes for these technologies to be adopted in ways that benefit human beings and that don't have these unintended side effects of external control. And Alexandria says in the chat, the Grindr community likely has done the research and ethics policy legwork on morphological freedom. And yes, that's one aspect of the transhumanist community where people do a lot of self-experimentation, and they also try to create these more open source protocols for instance, implantable microchips and other kinds of modifications that not all transhumanists embrace at this time. They're still kind of very experimental, cutting edge types of innovations, but I think they're very useful within a subset of the transhumanist community, because then people could offer alternatives to proprietary models, or at least they could offer models that don't cede aspects of individual autonomy to an external entity. So now I think we've come to a point in the discussion where I would invite some closing questions or comments from each of the panelists who are still on, and then we will ask Francesco to conclude with his remarks about the overall course of the discussion or any other ideas that may have occurred to him since we began the conversation with regard to how we might take it further, what lessons we could derive from it. But let's start with Art Ramon Garcia. What questions or comments do you have?
More a comment. As far as mainstream adoption, I think if we get to 2030 and we still have wheelchair companies in business in this country, selling to customers in this country, we're going to have a problem as far as mainstream adoption. Mm-hmm. And I think there are millions of disabled people around the world that, if we could help them, I mean, they're a visible result, and they could be, transhumanists. They can convert to transhumanist. Just because you receive a technology doesn't mean you're going to accept the ideology. I mean, from here till 2030, there could be people who accept, pig heart transplants, but they're not going to dance around, I'm a transhumanist now. They're going to see that as, an advanced technology. So I think transhumanism as a movement really needs to reach out to disabled people and somehow to private business and get more done as far as cybernetic parts. It's been over 5 years since I've seen someone with a robotic leg, and he was an injured vet. I saw him at the airport, and he was walking along and with his robotic leg, but that's the last time I saw someone with a cybernetic part, something that could be, embedded technology that could be considered transhumanist. And that's something I see that's just not being pursued very often. It's getting left behind. And to me, that could be sort of considered and used by anti-transhumanists as being selfish, that we're not helping these disabled people. We're more able-bodied people that wish to enhance ourselves, but we're leaving the disabled people behind. So I think, yeah, if we get to 2030 and we don't have a lot more people with cybernetic parts, I think mainstream adoption is going to be a failure. So just my thought.
Yeah, no, I can I interject on this because I think there's a really great company out there that has the potential. Hold on 1 second. Okay, yeah, really great company out there that has potential to propel this movement to the future, because they've been closely tied to. I'm sorry about that sound. My dog is making some squeaky sound with her toy. But it's Open Bionics. So if you get a chance to look into them, they were actually promoted through Deus Ex Human Revolution, and they've built the main character's prosthetic arm for many people with physical disabilities, from arms to prosthetic arms to legs, and they every time they share something on social media, they show how just the benefits of how it's impacted their everyday life. It's called, I believe it's called Open Bionics, if I recall correctly. Definitely Bionics is in the name. But yeah, they actually were first promoted through Deus Ex, because they were going to build Adam Jensen's prosthetic arm, and and then they had this little girl who wore it. There you go. Fashionably, it was like a fashion statement, but also improved their overall quality of life. And in fact, a lot of the commercials for Deus Ex Human Revolution showed it was like a small step into that future that we're talking about, where you're seeing the benefits of what a company can do for people in this field to improve their everyday life who are disabled, but also to improve abilities. Someone who's always wanted to play piano, but doesn't have, maybe have Parkinson's, or may have something that's prohibiting them from achieving this, right? So this company, would be able to provide you with so-and-so to help you improve that particular function. Cognitively, emotionally, or physically, I think that we have to have the right intention in place. And the intention has to be people over profits, right? And for that to change, there has to be a paradigm shift in just our economics. It's an economy that's that provides for humanity rather than for the corporation. It's that genuine intent. If no money was involved, that's what's missing. Where's that humanity? And if we find those and we can put them in politics, and we could put them in companies, I think that we'll be in the right direction. And I wholeheartedly agree with you that if we still have wheelchairs by 2030, we have failed. Disservice to transhumanism and to the future of humanity.
Yes, indeed. We hope that we'll have at least exoskeletons for all people with impaired walking ability by 2030, but better yet, robotic limbs that essentially replace their biological limbs to enable them to walk faster, run faster, be more resilient even than people are today. So now let's go to Pavel Ilan. Pavel, what are your questions or comments for Francesco?
I think it was a great discussion, and it's how beautifully it's transition from video games towards overcoming limitations, physical or even what's more important, mental limitations, like going beyond the embedded concepts and go beyond the zero-sum game. It was just a beautiful conversation, and Francesco, thank you so much for coming in.
Absolutely, it's been a great experience, and I hope to do this again in the future. You guys are all great.
Excellent. Now, Alexandria, are you able to state a question or comment?
Yes, I have a few things to say. First, thanks for showing up, Francesco.
You're very welcome.
I hope to follow up with you on some things later.
Absolutely.
See if we got, all the connections and all that. And what else? I put mom on the camera there for a moment, or put my camera at the mom camera. She can't walk at all. She totally kicked my ass last night, just trying to change her alone. and so, yes, I would like a world without wheelchairs right now.
Right.
Okay. we have so much to work on. Thanks so much.
No, absolutely. And I was trying, I was on my cell phone. If I was on my laptop, I was able to respond to a lot of what you were posting, but it did show up my phone every time you did. So I appreciate all your insight and all your help to, contributing to the discussion.
Excellent. Now let us go to BJ Murphy.
Francesco and I, we talk pretty much every single day, or at least try to, as much as possible. But I'm definitely appreciative of everything that he does, and all the topics that he's been talking about and bringing to light. And I hope that his focus on philosophy and his studies, and hoping to bring that education to other younger minds. I hope you, Francesco, are very successful in that regard. And we've talked every single day, and we talked about, when it came to our helping run the Transhumanism Future of Humanity group and trying to instill these ideas into everyday people. I believe that, you've shown your ability, and your drive to bring transhumanism to a much wider audience. So I'm glad you're here. I'm glad that you're on our side, and I hope to see a lot more in the future.
Thank you, BJ. Especially coming from you, we've seen it through from the very start. So it's been an honor, it's a pleasure. I'm grateful to know you. I've mentioned that many times, as you know, randomly, just appreciating your existence. But yeah, no, it definitely, it's a passion of mine, and it's a fire that won't let out. So it's something that I hope to bring to the future in the book that I'm putting together. Based on a lot of the work that I've put out there. So you won't see any articles from me anytime soon, because all that's going into a book.
All right. Well, we look forward to reading your book when it comes out, Francesco, so keep us posted. In the meantime, let's go to David Shoemaker for his comments.
I want to say thanks for being here, and I'm also very much looking forward to the book I just heard about. Today's stimulating conversation, and I went out and took a look at your Facebook presence, and I'm happy to hear about the book. And I'm very pleased for this conversation and all that you bring to it. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for your interest, and I'll definitely keep everyone updated.
Yes, indeed. And now let's go to Brent Elman.
Yeah, definitely a really great conversation today. A lot of great things that you've touched on, Francesco. Just to kind of go back to this idea of posthumanism and transhumanism, something that I was kind of thinking about through this conversation was that part of transhumanism would almost be, and to reference that meta-modernism, is to almost, there's got to be a way to bring aspects of posthumanism into the transhumanist community. And I think that like planned obsolescence is a great example of something that is in the culture right now that we need to just kind of move on from. And so I want to, my questions is kind of like, it's hard to put into words, but exactly how would you kind of encourage that kind of process to happen, to be able to see that?
Yeah, and so this is one of the most challenging parts of the movement, in my opinion, is that you have a philosophy in posthumanism that's so closely rooted in the aspirations of transhumanism, which is to merge biology with technology, which is something that posthumanists are ready for. And they've been advocating for. But I think that the intent from the transhumanist side, as opposed to posthumanist side, are what needs to merge. Not biology, technology. We need to merge posthumanism and transhumanism in a harmonious way, where because they're going to be, especially because a lot of what they're doing, is it complements what we're trying to do, but we have certain. I guess it's a more disciplined. I guess considerate movement on our end in terms of we're taking step-by-step approach where they're trying to take a space shuttle into the future, before we even have the ability to, create bridges. Okay. And I think that the key is to find exactly what it is that their aspirations are, which I've spoken to a couple recently, posthumanists, and it's actually pretty refreshing when you actually speak to some that actually express their concerns for human nature and what it's caused, because ironically, they are trying to accomplish what we're accomplishing through transhumanism, but they've given up on human nature. Whereas transhumanists are looking at it from a perspective where there's still work to be done. And if you look at the cultures that have accomplished what I've discussed earlier through meditation, beyond technology, on a basic human level, like Buddhists, right, who are highly researched in the psych field. They have brain scans and they see what meditation has done to their brain and why they function the way they do, why they think the way they do, how they can accomplish certain feats. Okay, I mean, you see some of the stuff they do through martial arts; it's mind blowing. Okay, what makes them different, right? So let's study the groups around the world, the cultures in the world who have accomplished what posthumanists are trying to to overcome. Okay, because they think that we're not capable of achieving that. And if there are any hurdles like disabilities, mental disabilities or physical, that prohibit people from accomplishing these feats or these achieving these perspectives and whatnot, being a better version of themselves, I think that we'll bridge a gap between both sides, and find a common ground where human nature is not abandoned, it's improved. And I think that the idea to just fight against posthumanists is the wrong way. I think that my philosophy is to be consistent, and if that means to continue being the example and showing that there is hope in humanity, there. And I think again, you mentioned this earlier, that it's posthumanists are also stemming from being human. You know what I mean? Like they're gonna have to retain some of the humanity to even get to that point. In another perspective too, and I don't mean to make this a long-winded response, but another perspective on this too is that in a sense, it's a glorified suicide. Posthumanists are aiming for, and if you put it in that perspective, there's nothing that appealing to that future, that we really can't communicate that. If we're trying to establish what transhumanism is and to get mass appeal, think about the way you look at it is thinking about explaining that to a 10-year-old, to a child, telling a child that your future means nothing, that it's human nature is nothing, that we're going to overcome and kill humanity. If you have a no guilty conscience of explaining that to a child, full of wonder and ambition and dreams, and you're saying that we're going to have a future where none of that will matter, I think that's where you have to start. And I think that posthumanists have a lot of self-reflecting to do that I think they too have avoided. And it's something that I firmly stand and will fight for until the very end. And hopefully when I'm not around, it'll be in these discussions that people can refer to and in the book that I'm going to write. And what will happen with transhumanism is what we put forward into the movement now. And I am very confident that just amongst us right here, having the common values, even though we're all different from different backgrounds. I don't know many of you personally, but the fact that we all share this common aspiration for the future, I'm very hopeful that posthumanists are not what we're concerned about.
I think that, to say one last thing before moving on from this engage, I think that what Art was saying as well, though, about needing to focus on projects that show proof of function, that the model functions of transhumanism, and focusing on the human side of transhumanism or even posthumanism, it seems to be really important in my mind, because I think that like that, like what Art referenced, that the idea of 2030s and wheelchair companies still existing. I think that that's something we really need to be considering, all of us as transhumanists, and to try to think about how we can merge, how we can actually solve some of these problems without having just this ideological, almost science fiction dreams, and there's ways to really
I
do
love
things so that people
I love what he said,
keep
because
going.
it's taking things that are practical that we can all see, visibly see. It's so common in many people's lives all around the world. It's something that we can all. It's not something that we are proud about, because we still have people in wheelchairs, but it's something that we can look at, tangible, and say, look, these are acts of compassion from science and technology. Okay, we need more humanitarians in science and technology. Okay, more humanitarians and philosophers, ethical philosophers in the field, that are pioneering this movement, really. Because in my opinion, from my perspective, even though we've been behind this for a long time, I still think the movement is in its infancy in terms of its mainstream appeal, and its exposure. I think that we need to do more in terms of getting people to first understand what this is all about, and then show examples, physical examples of how transhumanism has benefited humanity. And even I think someone mentioned earlier Elon Musk. Elon Musk is a transhumanist, right? There was a time when I think there were people stuck in a mine, a coal mine, I think it was, or in a mountain, and miners, and he was, the first thing he thought of, you know what? I'm going to send a submarine over there and get them out. Like that. There was no money. No one's thinking about, oh, how much is this going to cost? No. It's right now. The most important thing is getting these people out, right? So when those acts of compassion, of altruistic, drives your aspiration to better humanity, that is transhumanism. Okay, that is transhumanism. When you're trying to cure cancer because you're tired of seeing people die from it, not give more medication or more procedures that don't really solve the issue, just put a band-aid on it. That's the other side. That's the side that we're trying to overcome, which is the corporate greed, which is the money, which is all the things that Jacques Fresco would say are not going to. You don't need money to build a building, okay? And it's crazy. You don't need money to do research, okay? But we live in a world where certain things can't be done without the powers that be, okay? And I think that we're going to get to a point where if these discussions turn into actualized physical examples for people, that, like, look, there's a company here who's outsourcing these prosthetics, who's outsourcing, as a project, like Jacques Fresco, he's got his whole Venus project in Florida, okay? And he didn't do that because he's trying to make money off of it. He did it because that was his passion. He did it because he had a vision for the future. And I think that us as genuine transhumanists, we need to do more like this, these discussions, and put them out there for people to see. And then I think it was Aaron who says we need to reach out to influencers, those who have a big say in the community, in this field, who are willing to, put out a tweet, just even mentioning transhumanism, and then me showing something physical, physical proof of its benefits. I think that we can make a big difference that way. You have to take advantage, leverage these platforms. So yeah, I think that we are in a very unique position, because it's a movement that I think is starting to fall into place, in terms of what it stands for, what it means, and the fact that we're able to see through the veil of those who are misconstruing it also shows that we understand what it is, and where we want it to be. So yeah, I'm not so concerned about the backlash in terms of those who oppose it, like posthumanists, and what we're trying to achieve, because I think that the results will speak for themselves, as Aaron said earlier.
Indeed, I think that a key aspect of the message that transhumanists should convey is that essentially there are both good parts and bad parts to evolved human nature. And we want to preserve the good parts while overcoming the bad parts. It's as simple as that. So humans are capable of extraordinary good, and they're also capable of extraordinary evil. And it depends on which parts of existing human nature are amplified and emphasized. And the transhumanist vision seeks to enhance all of the beneficial parts of human nature while relegating the relics of our evolutionary past that lead to suboptimal behaviors into the dustbin of history, so that we no longer have tribal conflicts, we no longer have cognitive biases, we no longer have irrational emotions dominating us, but we're still the same people. We still have the essence of what makes us the individuals whom we are. Everything of value that is within us would still be retained and even taken to the next level by these emerging technologies. And this is where, yes, I cannot agree with those who hate humanity altogether, or who think that humans should just be replaced by an entirely different set of entities, whether those be AIs or some other set of entities, because I want the future to be for us. I want these same individuals who are here talking to experience the future. And yes, we will change in certain respects, but the change will be incremental. It will be building on top of what we have.
Yeah, and that foundation needs to be established, because you can't cross a bridge if you don't have a strong support system, right? And so I think that that's what we're doing here today, and I hope to continue doing in the future. I appreciate all of your insights and perspectives. I learned some new things today as well. So definitely keep this going. Your work is invaluable, again. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you very much, Francesco, for joining us today. I would like to echo the sentiment you expressed, that this conversation is a great example of what we can accomplish when we bring our minds together, when we bring our best ideas to the discussion, and we're offering it to the entire world for free. It's entirely non-monetary, just as the U.S. Transhumanist Party has been entirely non-monetary up until now. And it shows us what we can accomplish with technology, because there's a whole infrastructure of technology that has made this possible. But now we can directly pursue the goals that we have, and we don't have to involve money at every instance.
You're making me smile. Yeah, I'm like smiling ear to ear, because I was going to segue into this being a prime example of what can be accomplished without, I never once asked, to be on the show how much I'm going to get paid, because what we're doing today is invaluable, completely invaluable. And I hope that those watching, those who will be watching in the future, have, important takeaways that they'll reflect on what we discussed today. And maybe even check out Deus Ex Human Revolution, because it's got something to say too.
Yes, absolutely. If you are looking for a great way to spend your time, if you have a few hours on a weekend and you want an immersive experience of at least a transhumanist potential world, with all of its challenges and dilemmas as well, but all of its promises also, check out the game Deus Ex Human Revolution. You've heard 4 people in this conversation who have played it and enjoyed it. But now I think we shall bring this conversation to a close. Francesco, any final comments that you want to make?
Just to keep going, keep moving forward. As Deus Ex would say, there was a slogan they used, and I'm adamant and will continue to advocate for it, is you can't kill progress. You as much as people will try to defy and object to the future that transhumanists aspire to, the genuine, those who care for humanity, just keep pushing forward. Keep pushing forward. If your intent is in the right place and it's for the betterment of humanity, keep doing what you're doing. Join the discussion. Get on this panel. and share your insights. Do the small things in your community. Like for me, for example, I'm trying to be a middle school and high school teacher for history, but to incorporate philosophy, to incorporate these courses, so that the younger generation going to the future have this established foundation about who they are and where we're going. So do what you can, get on discussion and advocate for more transhumanism in social media, in entertainment, and to show the benefits of the future that we're striving for.
Yes, absolutely. Keep pushing forward. It's a great sentiment on which to conclude 2020 and our extensive series of virtual enlightenment salons this year. I believe we've had 35 virtual enlightenment salons during essentially the most difficult year in recent human history. So that is an achievement for everybody who participated in our discussions, for all of our guests, for all of our regular USTP officers, and for our viewers who came in to observe these conversations, who derived value from them, that I would expect helped them in some less than ideal circumstances. And we're going to try to continue that through 2021. You will see some announcements regarding our forthcoming salons. We have some quite interesting and prominent guests in certain cases lined up. So please be on the lookout on social media. And if you're a member of the US Transhumanist Party, be on the lookout for email updates regarding future virtual enlightenment salons. These are exactly the kinds of conversations that we need to be having in order to reach the kind of future of humanity that we aspire toward. And until then, live long and prosper.